Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Martinez, and today I'm going to be reflecting on Chapter 1, Chapter 2 for this weekly discussion. So Chapter 1 basically was about emergent bilinguals. Basically, what I interpreted from this chapter and what I understood from this chapter was that students who are not yet proficient in English, we must advocate for using the words emergent bilingual. Giving so, the reason students are named or called emergent bilinguals can result in more adequate education for the students as well. Also, in this chapter, we learned that what's in the name. Thinking that these students are emergent bilinguals has important consequences not only for them, but also for the teachers, policymakers, parents, and language education professionalism. The term emergent bilingual allows us to imagine a different scenario instead of being regarded as limited in some way as English language learners. As before, we used to call these students ELLs, and I believe that using the term emergent bilingual is more adequate and more appropriate because these students are bilingual. They're not lacking the language, they're just being bilingual. So I think it was very interesting that Chapter 1 introduced this term, and it recognizes the fact of linguistic performances and are always emerging depending on the task which are performed. So giving emergent bilinguals a name does not focus on their limitations, but that means that the family community language practice has seen as educational resources instead. So that was Chapter 1. Chapter 2 basically gave us a demographics of emergent bilinguals, who they are, what they are, where are they, and so on. So something interesting about Chapter 2 that I found interesting was how are they designated? The question of how many emergent bilinguals there are has to be the way in which we are designated and reclassified as a specific category of student. So, educating my emergent bilinguals, knowing who they are. Despite the differences among Chapter 2, letting us know the different demographics, there's some things that we must have in our minds in order to understand and know who these emergent bilinguals are. For example, most live in urban areas and attended under-resourced schools that are segregated. About 3/4 were born in the United States, although approximately half of are in elementary school. The greatest increase in the numbers of emergent bilinguals are in high school age students, although many of them do not graduate, unfortunately. And most of the Latinx generation origin, despite the great linguistic diversity characterized by population. So that was Chapter 2. And lastly was the FL Consent Decree, which basically were a historical rundown of where we are today and the way we use emergent bilinguals. The Florida Consent Decree basically gave us a historical overview. For instance, in 1961, Dade County Public Schools became the first in the district in the nation to implement a full bilingual education program due to largely the great influx of children from Cuba. In addition to the most recent 1990 Florida Consent Decree, signed off that under the decree, districts and districts are responsible for properly identifying the ELL students and for providing accurate academic assessment information. So following that, we also get ways that to identify and assess these students. We also get information onto how to equally assess appropriate programming for each individual student, in addition to exceptional student education and career technical education. So basically, the decree just gave us an overview of everything that has been implemented to help these emergent bilinguals.